Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining this week's Next Normal series from Worth Live on what the future of space exploration looks like. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well during what has and continues to be a challenging time for so many people. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford, CEO at Worth Media, and I'm delighted to be joined by a special guest today, Dylan Taylor, CEO and Chair of Voyager Space Holdings, and Kathleen Entwistle, Managing Director and Private Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. Hi Dylan, how are you?
Fantastic, Juliet. How are you? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for being here, and Kathy will be with us shortly, I think. As many of you know, our intention at Worth is to create conversations that help inspire and inform our community, many of whom are investors, entrepreneurs, and business leaders who want to leave a positive impact on the world and help to create a more inclusive and equal economy and society for the benefit of everyone. And we call that Worth Beyond Wealth. So we hope you enjoy this session and find it interesting and valuable today. Forward thinking is really the essence of this series, The Next Normal, where Worth is looking ahead to what the world looks like in this new environment that we're now all living in. Back in April, as we hit pause on Earth due to the rapid rising rate of COVID-19 cases, NASA also announced that it wanted to land astronauts on Mars by 2033, I think it was. So how has the pandemic affected some of our most dreamiest of our ambitions? We're delighted to be joined by leader in this space, Dylan Taylor, CEO and Chair of Voyager Space Holdings, along with Kathy Entwistle, for this discussion on how COVID has affected the space industry, the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, and what the future looks like for space exploration. A few housekeeping rules before we get started. This is a conversation and we do welcome questions from you. Please do use your chat function at the bottom of the screen within Zoom and set it to all panelists and all attendees, and you can share your comments and questions. I'll be monitoring that and we can feed your questions into the speakers or weave it into the conversation as we go. We can unmute you, or if you'd rather not, don't worry, and we can you can remain anonymous, and I'll bring it into the conversation. So let's get started. Dylan, whereabouts are you located? You're in Denver, correct?
Yes, I'm in Denver. That's right.
How has the last 8 months been for you?
Oh, you know, I'm maybe feeling a little bit of survivor guilt, Juliet, honestly, because I know how much suffering there is, and I know it's been a very difficult period of time for really everybody in 2020. But you know, things have been actually quite good, and I say that cautiously because not only is the space industry quite healthy at the moment, but the company I have the privilege to run is on a very good trajectory as well. So, you know, certainly recognizing that there's a lot of suffering out there and a lot of people are really struggling, but things are actually quite well, and I'm sort of sheepish when I say that, but I'm being honest when I answer it that way.
And that's good to hear. And I think, like many other people, are feeling sort of very, very grateful. I think we've had a sort of moment to sort of reset and reflect over the last 8 months. Before we get going, I'd love just to hear from you briefly about your background and how you became involved in this field.
Sure. Well, my background really is running large multinational companies. That's really how my career was built. I was first in the electronics industry, then later automotive, and then later real estate. But my lifelong passion has always been space. And so about 10 years ago, I got involved in the industry really as an investor and mentor. At that time, I had formed a friendship with someone I had met at the World Economic Forum, and sort of said, look, I want to get plugged into the space industry. They were an early space industry entrepreneur. And, you know, the way I think about things is, you know, how can you bring value to situations? And I was thinking, you know, what could I contribute to this industry? And I thought to myself, well, I can contribute a bit of capital, personal capital, to try to get some of these early stage companies funded. But then also, just given my business experience of running businesses at scale, perhaps I could lend some business mentorship to some of these founders. And so that's really where I focused my efforts early on. And then eventually made the move full-time to space, and running Voyager now, which is not an early stage investor. It's actually a later stage investor where we're actually acquiring companies that have already, generated revenue and profit. And we intend to take that company public in 2021. So it's a traditional roll-up, but it's under an operating company structure.
And Dylan, have you always had an interest in space? Like as a boy, were you one of those kids that wanted to be an astronaut?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, no, it's lifelong passion. And I think for me, everyone sort of approaches space perhaps from a different point of view. I think for me, there are two things that resonate about it. One is this notion of discovery and exploration. What's over the hill? What is it that we don't know? What might be out there? So I'm just absolutely fascinated by that element of it. But probably even more so, I'm really fascinated by space as a tool for transformation. And by that, I mean, there are very few things that I'm aware of that can allow people to sort of totally reset the way they see the world. And I think space is one of those because it provides a way for, us fish, if I can use that analogy, to get out of the fishbowl and realize we're in a fishbowl. And so I think space is transformative. And if you talk to astronauts, and I have the privilege of knowing several, we have 4 on the board of my company, to a person, they talk about how transformational space has been and how their worldview and their human view has been disrupted by that experience. So I think to me, that's the driving force behind the passion is, this is something that really allows us to take humanity and reimagine it in a new framework and hopefully a more enlightened framework.
I find this whole area fascinating, and we'll get in. I've got lots of questions. I wanted to say a very warm welcome to you, Kathy. Hi, how are you?
Well, sorry for the delay. I'm happy to be here. Nice to see you, Dylan, and thanks for having me, Julia. I'm admiring your top, which is very space sort of inspired.
Yeah, I went space themed today for the topic. And Kathy, so Dylan knows Drew, who is a mutual friend of ours. So,
yes.
So Kathy also knows Drew very well, who is an artist that's been on this series previously, and Drew was the one that recommended that we speak to Dylan, and Worth has been doing an interview with Dylan, and I said you should come on to this Next Normal series. So Kathy, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs, you work with a lot of business leaders, particularly ones that are going through sort of growth stages in the evolution of their business. Would you just share for the audience and for Dylan a bit more about your background and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a managing director and private wealth advisor at Morgan Stanley, and I do work with private clients, so individuals, families, entrepreneurs, C-suite executives, just really helping put together their priorities when it comes to goals and values and matching it with their resources, making sure we're investing properly, and also looking at all the other areas that are important to them, which could be interests such as space, or it could be estate planning, or whatever is important to them. So we help with all areas, not just investment consulting, but the whole advanced planning process, estate planning, tax mitigation, all that fun stuff. Plus, I guess client relationship management, where we sort of quarterback all of their important professionals, CPAs, estate planning attorneys, and so forth. So we're all on the same page.
Thank you. So there's so much mystery, I think, around the space industry. I think lots of other industries you get you get to understand, and I was trying to think about why that is, and I think it's that notion of experience and connection to what the industries are. And as a consumer, many industries we all consume, whereas space is one of those things that I think is quite hard to reach unless you're actually physically in that industry. Dylan, I'm curious on your view on this from being in the inside, and whether you kind of empathize and recognize that kind of that dynamic.
I do, but I think the irony is, and I joke with people about this, I think everyone is in the space industry. They just don't know it yet. Because if you look at how space is disrupting our lives, I mean, the most obvious thing is the GPS constellation. If you look at, financial markets, if you look at pretty much every major technology business right now, whether it's Airbnb or Uber, or, take your pick. And if you look at the iPhone or smartphone revolution, that's all GPS enabled, right? That's all enabled by the constellations we have in orbit. If you look at what's happening in terms of the constellations being built by SpaceX and Amazon right now for high-speed internet, when that's rolled out, I think that will change the world, literally. We have about 2 billion people on planet Earth that don't have access to high-speed internet. And literally that's going to change probably over the next 12 months. So imagine 2 billion people coming online over a period of 1 to 2 years. I think that's an extraordinary sea change. So I understand your meta point, which is it seems very very distant to everyday experience, but the fact is it really permeates pretty much everything that we do.
That's really interesting. And Voyager, I know you shared a bit about the company. When was it set up and how was it set up?
Yeah, it's essentially a classic operating company roll up. So if you the most famous operating holding company is Berkshire Hathaway, legendary, of course. But the difference with our company is these companies are very much integrated together. So if you think about space, having capability internal allows you to compete for larger and larger and more complex missions. For example, Voyager had 2 very significant wins with NASA yesterday. And we were able to do that because we have the capability internally to bid and win those missions. So that's why I would say we're not, holding company a la Berkshire Hathaway. There are a couple other companies you might have heard of. One's Danaher, which is a very successful company in this kind of framework. And the other one would be Heiko. So it's very much leveraging entrepreneurship. So we very much want to harness the entrepreneurship and the innovation. So we're typically not acquiring 100% of the equity. We're acquiring maybe 60%, majority control, but maybe 60%. And we're really leveraging the entrepreneurs to continue to do what they do best, which is innovate and come up with new products and services, and then really leveraging scale in the back office with shared services, and then the front office in terms of how do you sell into NASA? How do you sell into the Department of Defense? How do you make a compelling policy argument that certain things that we are capable of delivering belong on the product roadmap or investment roadmap, things of that nature. So we're trying to harness the best of the big company infrastructure with the best of the entrepreneurial spirit.
That makes sense, and it's and it sounds quite transformative, really. I want to fast forward to this year and 2020. How has the pandemic affected the space industry, if at all?
Yeah, I would say not much. I mean, early on, there was tremendous disruption, I would say, in the supply chain. And with all the uncertainty around, are the contracts at risk? Are vendors at risk? Should I extend credit to this company, or are they going to be in business in 30 days? Lots and lots and lots of uncertainty around that. I think PPP helped alleviate some of those concerns. And then once I think the industry realized that a lot of these core missions, like returning to the moon in 2024 or thereabouts with Artemis, which is the name of the NASA to land the first woman on the moon, as an example, that's still on track. That some of the tailwinds regarding national security, these would be things like hypersonics and the rise of China. Some of these meta themes were still providing, dollars of funding. And of course, within space, you have all of the government buyers as a client, but you now have this sort of commercial space revolution led by SpaceX and others. So once everyone realized that theme was still on track, really it's been business as usual. And more recently, I would say in my opinion, and others would be more expert on this, I think space is probably the hottest industry right now, or one of them, for investment. Just by way of example, SpaceX raised about $2 billion last month on I think, $44 billion pre-money valuation. And that offering was completely oversubscribed. In fact, they probably could have sold twice as much equity as they did. We just had a SPAC announcement last week. I think SPACs are in
Right
vogue.
now.
And there was a startup, literally a pre-revenue space company acquired by a SPAC on $1 billion valuation. So things are very flush right now, to the point where I would almost say I have concerns about that, because I imagine the industry in 10 years. And so I don't want it to get too boom and bust, which has sort of been the narrative around space in the past. So I think there's a danger of that, but it's very healthy right now, no question.
And Kathy, are you seeing, just from the sort of financial space, are you seeing that on your side of things at the firm, more opportunities?
I know that Morgan Stanley definitely sees it as a bigger opportunity right now. Personally, with my client base, I haven't seen as much yet, but I do think there's a great opportunity there, as Dylan was talking about. And to me, the more natural ways right now to access that space, literally, would be through things like private equity or SPACs. SPACs are special purpose acquisition corps, and usually somebody who ran a company prior successfully will look for money, or seed money, to go out and buy another company to run. So that makes perfect sense too. The SPAC is definitely the hot way to access capital these days. So yeah, it's very interesting. I also do think, I like what Dylan said. It sort of just made me think a little bit differently about it, in terms of the digital aspect of it, the technology aspect of it, and the fact that it's really happening around us already. It's hard to, when we're not in it every day, Dylan, like you are, it's hard to wrap my head around it. And I'm curious as to who you talk to. In my world, I have peers and colleagues that I talk to get insights and research reports and so forth. I'd be interested to hear who you speak to get energized and insights, and for the next steps as well.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, I'm pretty heavily involved in a lot of the space events and sort of the panels and a lot of the sort of thought leadership that comes out. So that's one way to do it. There are a couple of firms I would recommend to at least monitor. One would be Bryce, BRYCE, based in DC, that does great analytic work for the industry. Another is a former banker, I think with Raymond James, Chris Quilty, who has his own shop, Quilty Analytics, mainly focused on satellites, but in public market type information. That's interesting to me. Those would be two. There are a bunch of others. And if you go to my personal website, dylantaylor.org, I try to republish a lot of that research under my blog. So, and if folks go there and they don't find exactly what they need or want, feel free to reach out to me. But it's a great question, because the other point I would make about space is it's evolving so quickly that, literally, if you haven't refreshed your understanding in 6 months, you probably don't have a feel for where things are. I mean, it's moving that quickly. It really is.
I think, oh, sorry, Juliet. I was just going to say too, the other piece, Dylan, that I think is, quite thoughtful is the supply chain concept. And that I think the companies that have their own supply chain control or control over the supply chain has fared much better in COVID. And I would imagine will fare better in many other obstacles to come, whatever they may be.
Yeah, you nailed it. And that's part of our thinking with Voyager is, supply chain economics is all about value chain capture, and value chain capture is all about assembling capability. In iterating quicker. And when you're vertically integrated, I mean, this is where SpaceX, and I would put / Tesla, because it's a similar model, they've just crushed it. because they can iterate so much quicker and they have so much more control over the resources. Now, the danger, if you go that direction, is you stifle innovation. But if you can thread that needle, then, I mean, you really can create a lot of value because you can out-iterate and out-innovate. So I think you nailed it.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's exactly the right way to do it, I think.
And what if everyone says Tesla is not a car company? And if you're
Right.
looking at Tesla as a car company, you're looking at it in the wrong way.
Right, right.
It's got so much more innovation and opportunity with the way they're thinking strategically.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the way they've reinvented even how you buy a car, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there is no dealership, right? A battery technology. You know, I tried to make a service appointment the other day, and they said, no, we'll come to you. So, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we'll send a technician to your house. I'm like, great, perfect. I mean, those are the kinds of things. And of course, in space, you know, well, battery technology is not easy, but a lot of space, you know, truly is rocket science. I mean, it really is very difficult, you know, physics that you're dealing with. So if you are more innovative, you can create technical competitive advantages. Like what SpaceX has done with relanding rocket boosters, totally changed the economics of launch, completely.
And Dylan, you I think you touched on this a bit, but the sort of the opportunity in this space, but it is one of the challenges, given there's so many new entrants coming in and new startups into this space. Is there a risk that we see, you know, what happened with the tech bubble and the sort of overvaluation of this market?
Yes, short answer is yes. I mean, I think the industry, we have it pegged around 450 billion right now, round numbers. I think Goldman and Morgan Stanley and some others have it going to 3 trillion by 2030. I think that's low, personally. So if that's the growth trajectory, you know, long-term outlook is amazing. You know, I've said before in a couple of articles that I think space will be 10% of global GDP by 2040. And I think that's a reasonable premise. But to your point, Juliet, that doesn't mean that we can't have boom bust. Doesn't mean it can't get overcapitalized. It doesn't mean the valuations. You know, I'm of the view that valuations in general in the world are a bit out of whack. So in that sense, I don't think space is that much different. But it is a concern for sure.
And we have a question from someone that's asked, how can everyday investors get into this market?
Yeah, it's difficult. If you're a qualified investor, there are some angel opportunities, perhaps. There are some funds that, you know, 2 years ago, we didn't have a single space fund, and now there's probably 7 or 8 I can think of. And I'd be very happy, you know, to provide my contact info and get them in touch with the right people. You know, there are some fly-by-nights, so you have to sort of, you know, I would like to make a recommendation because not all of them are built equally. But I think if you're not a qualified investor, you know, that's part of the challenge. There are no retail other than Virgin Galactic, which also went public via a SPAC, and this new SPAC that, if approved, will be trading in early 2021. There's really not any great retail plays. It's part of the reason why we intend to take Voyager public next year. We just think the retail demand for space is very, very, very high. So I wish I had a better answer. My only advice on the angel investing, it's super risky, super, super risky. And, you know, I joke with people, they'll say, well, I'm going to make a couple of angel investments. I say, well, then don't, because if you're not making 8 or 9 or 10 and have a portfolio, no one on planet Earth is smart enough to pick winners and losers with 1 or 2 angel. It's just not possible, because the best teams fail and the worst teams succeed. So you really need a portfolio in order to diversify that risk, in my humble opinion.
You know, what's interesting, Dylan, for our clients, I will actually say the same for SPACs. Like, don't just buy one SPAC. If you're going to invest in SPACs, almost look at it like you want to diversify a portfolio of SPACs, because some might, you know, come up with a big win, and some might, you know, have 18 months go by and not be able to find a company to invest in.
I think that's great advice. And, Angel investing can be incredibly lucrative, but it's nearly impossible to pick a single winner or loser. I don't care how smart you are and how much experience you have. It really is.
I might have to have you on my next investors call.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. I'd love to participate. But I also do think, just back to the societal piece, I do worry about this. We have an income inequality problem, in my view. And, presumably the folks on this call and people who we're associated with have access to these investments or these paths that other people don't have access to. So once you get to that level, once you're accredited, once you have relationships with wealth managers and have access to these opportunities, then you're going to do better than people who don't. And so I think over time, it just accentuates the differences. So I'm not sure how we solve that, but it is a concern.
So I think you should definitely get on the investor call. And I think Morgan Stanley has a space team, right?
They do.
Now?
Yeah. In fact, they just put out a research report. Recently, I read their research all the time. It's excellent. Some of the best. I should have mentioned it earlier when you were asking for what I read to stay current.
Right.
So it's definitely on the list.
You just touched on, I guess it sort of links to inclusivity and diversity and the wealth gap. And it's something that we touch on a lot through our Women and Worth community and really our worth as a whole, and how do we build for a more inclusive and equal economy. I'm curious as to, and I know we spoke about this earlier, what is the industry thinking in terms of making space as an industry more inclusive? Because I think historically it has been seen as a very male white industry. And what kind of things exist either in the not-for-profit world or others where actually the day-to-day people can get to space?
Right. All great questions. And this is something I'm super passionate about. So a couple of thoughts. There is a nonprofit that I founded. I'm not running. We have an amazing leader running it called Space for Humanity. And the whole notion with that nonprofit is to send everyday citizens of diverse backgrounds to space, pay for their ticket to go, have them have this hopefully transformative experience. And then in return, they have to come back and essentially do a fellowship tied to UN Sustainable Development Goals and demonstrating that they're impacting their local communities. So we're super passionate about that. And that's, I think, one area. My fear is as space tourism happens, which is going to happen very soon, it could happen later this year, certainly it'll happen next year, that it becomes, not to pick on them, but Lady Gaga, Justin Bieber, kind of Hollywood jet set narrative, as opposed to spaces for everyone. So I think that's important. A couple other initiatives that we're very passionate about. One is called the Brooke Owens Fellowship, named after a young woman who was very influential early in her career and died tragically. And that's all about getting young female talent in key positions in the industry. And so Voyager's very honored to be, they call them brookies, to accept these brookies and sort of mentor them into the industry. So that's another one. We just launched, we meaning the industry, another fellowship around African-American STEM educated individuals. I should do a shout out. There's a gentleman, actually two people, Will Pomerantz, who's at Virgin, who's been a leader in this, and then Lori Garver, former administrator, associate administrator at NASA. Lori and Will have really driven this. And then the last initiative, which I'm working on with Lori and Loretta Whitesides and others, is a diversity, women's board diversity initiative for the industry. And the notion behind that is not only more women directors on space companies, but there's actually some research around this that says if you're going to add just one female director, you shouldn't have any, because it's essentially, you're kidding yourself that you're getting the benefits of diversity. You need two or three so that cohort actually feels comfortable, really advocating and really communicating in an effective way. And so we essentially are advocating to the people who have women directors today that they need to expand that. And why can't it be that a board of directors is majority women? I mean, If everything was working the way it should, you should have half the boards that have majority men and half the boards that have majority women, right? There should be like almost like a randomization, but now it's like just shockingly rare. So that's sort of the point of view that we have going into it. But I also think it's an easier sell to go into not to pick on it, but like a Lockheed Martin or a company like that and say, okay, you have 2 female directors. You really need to add 2 or 3 others. And not only will it benefit the people you add and the board, but it will benefit the existing directors you have because you're going to get more out of them because they're going to feel more comfortable. And there's actually some research that supports that. So I'm very passionate about that.
Where did you get that passion from, Dylan? What drove the passion?
Well, I think I have 2 daughters, so I think that's part of it. But I think space is hard, and this is the next big thing for humanity, right? This is our destiny in many respects. Not to say we're going to leave Earth, but our destiny is to diversify beyond Earth, and to do that, I mean, it's so incredibly difficult to pull that off. You need every smart person, every best and brightest anywhere on planet Earth, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, language, right? You can't be playing with I think of it like Major League Baseball before Jackie Robinson. It's like, how can that be the best team? Because you're leaving out 2/3 of society. It doesn't, so I think of space that way. How can you win with half your talent not available? It makes no sense. It's not logical.
Right? We might also have to have you a guest at the Worth and Women's Summit next year, Julia. We love male, advocates and partners.
And it just doesn't. Yeah, it's just so counterintuitive. If you were CEO of the industry or CEO of the world, you wouldn't do it that way, right? You wouldn't do it that way and win. Maybe that's the right way to say it. Because
so where do you see space? You said next year, tourism. Where do you see it in 5 years and 10 years? One of the questions that we were going to maybe discuss is sort of returns, investment returns. Where do you see this coming full circle?
Right. Well, I think the next big milestone for us is to go back to the moon to stay. One of the companies that Voyager acquired, we were very interested in because they have the core IP and core patent around extracting oxygen from moon soil. And if you think about something like going back to the moon, it's not realistic to take everything you need with you, right? It's like when you go camping, you don't take all your firewood and all your water, you take a water filter and an axe and you use the resources in there in situ. So I think we've gotten smart about that. So going back to the moon to stay and having an outpost there, I think will happen in 5-ish years. I think within 10-ish years, I do think we'll make Mars. It's aggressive, but then again, I would never bet against Elon. He's normally off on his projections, but not dramatically so. So I think Mars is in the cards for sure. Just to give people a sense, I know we don't necessarily have space. Not everyone's a space expert, but the moon is about 250,000 miles, 225,000 miles away from Earth. And Mars is about 35 million miles away from Earth. So it's a totally different order of magnitude and complexity. And oh, by the way, you can only launch every 20 months or so, 22 months, because of the orbits. And it takes you about 14 months to get there. So it's a very difficult mission.
I'm loving this topic. I've got so many questions. And there are some questions that have come in as well. Just building on what Kathy said, and when you expect to see returns in full circle, to what extent is what we're doing in space, are we thinking about impact and sustainability and climate and the environment? And what extent is that integrated into the thinking around space exploration?
Well, I think it's a really, really good question. I get this question a lot. And I know this isn't the backstory on your question, but what I remind people of is the entire environmental movement was born out of the Earthrise photo. Our entire knowledge of our climate, our entire ability to measure hurricanes and climate change is all based upon space-based assets. So without space and without the space industry, I'm not convinced we would even have an environmental movement, honestly, because we wouldn't have that perspective, and we wouldn't have certainly the social texture behind really, pushing this. So I think it's part and parcel. The other thing I'll say is there was a gentleman named Gerard O'Neill, who was a professor at Princeton, who sort of designed the quintessential rotating space station, if you've seen that image. But he inspired he inspired lots of us, but Jeff Bezos was one of his, the folks that he inspired. And in fact, the story, as I understand it, is Jeff, in his valedictorian speech in high school, said, I've read this book called The High Frontier by Gerard O'Neill. I'm going to go make a bunch of money in some industry, I don't know what. And then I'm going to go implement this book, which essentially is how you settle space. And by the way, I further have been told that he selected Princeton because that's where Gerard O'Neill was professor. But the vision of that book, which I share, is that why couldn't we have space manufacturing and heavy industry off-world? And essentially, imagine the Earth as almost like a national park, right? Everything is pristine. Everything here is sort of sustainable and beautiful. And, as Bezos has joked, he's like, Mars is stupid. He's like, Mars doesn't have any waterfalls. Mars doesn't have Hawaii, and he's right in a sense, right? So I think the point there is, if we fulfill the vision of really settling space and putting infrastructure in space, we can then start off-worlding, some of these things that are detrimental. We need them for a modern, well, we think we need them for a modern civilization, but there's no reason why we couldn't put them in space ultimately. So that would be my answer.
I wonder as well whether the space industry can do more to help the dialogue on Earth around the climate crisis, because I do think there is I think as much as the media try and report on the crisis in a lot of ways, I don't think it's necessarily computing with a lot of people on Earth. And I do wonder whether there's more that the space industry can do to help force that dialogue and create the urgency around it.
Well, I think yes, but I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. What's missing? The reason these problems seem so intractable, like income inequality and climate change, in my view, is because we're not looking at them from the right context, right? We're being very parochial and very narrow in the way we see the world. And I think space allows you to get out of that fishbowl and really see things. I mean, COVID, I think, the one positive thing that I can see from COVID is gone are the days where you can say, look, that doesn't affect me, right? I mean, everything affects everybody. And I think, COVID has certainly demonstrated that. And I think that's the perspective. If you talk to astronauts, like deeply, speak with them, over a glass of wine, that kind of thing, they'll share with you that that's their ethos. And it wasn't necessarily their ethos before they went to space. So I think that's why, to your point, I think space does have a bigger role to play, but I think it's less of an advocacy and it's more of an access, because the more people who go, they're almost like seeds of, enlightenment, if I can use that term.
Yeah.
That you kind of spread around the world. But I think to me, that's the key, because so many people are just unconscious about what these issues are, I think, in my view.
I want to go to some of the questions from the audience. Justin, let's go to you next, because you shared a lovely experience you had, and I think you've got a great question, which I'm keen to hear from Dylan.
Thank you very much, Juliet. I guess you can hear me. Just sound check here.
Yeah.
Brilliant, excellent. Yeah, no, I did share a story. I mean, it's just, and I think, Dylan, you really kind of connected with something I've been thinking, is that perspective, that new context that one can get from space. And I think, the climate crisis and the whole environmental aspect is something that I worry about a lot. And I think during lockdown, that's what has kind of led me to connect more with space. I'm a complete amateur, but it just gives you something completely different. I often think to myself, if intelligent life forms were looking down on Earth, they would think we're pretty stupid down here with what we're doing to the planet. So I do find it incredibly important. And yeah, there is a story in the chat there. So my question for you is, what, Dylan, is your most treasured space moment, that special something that just grabbed you emotionally?
Well, I've got a ton of them. Can I just share one with you from yesterday?
Yeah.
So one of my friends, I would call him a close friend, happens to be a board member of the company that I run, and he happens to be, in my mind, the number one planetary scientist in the world, a gentleman named Alan Stern, who ran the mission to Pluto, the New Horizons mission, and he's done a bunch of other missions. Very, very well known. I mean, it really is the number one planetary scientist in the world, really. He has been a lifelong dreamer of being an astronaut. And I think I don't know how old Alan is, but I'm going to guess he's maybe late 50s or early 60s. Well, come to find out, just yesterday, they announced NASA has picked a scientist to go to space on Virgin Galactic to do some scientific missions. It'll be the first case where NASA is buying commercial flights on a commercial space provider to do science. And they also announced that Alan is going to be the first astronaut that they've selected to do that. And so to share that experience with Alan, he actually called me the day before the press release in confidence. I said, I can keep a secret. And he was like a little kid. I mean, he really was. And so to me, that's really the power of space. It's not only fulfilling sort of childhood dreams, but it's really imagining a new way. I mean, imagine you're an astronomer. He's fundamentally a planetary scientist, but he's really into astronomy. You're doing new science in a new spacecraft. I mean, it's a spaceship, right? You're doing new science in a spaceship. And that's all supported by a space agency that is now bought into this notion of commercial space. And for a lot of us who've been in the industry for a while, that wasn't assured, right? There was a long time kind of battle between people in NASA who didn't think commercial space was a thing. We need to do all of it versus, hey, we're going to buy commercial flights from SpaceX and others. So I would say that's my favorite. I've got a gazillion more, but that one just happened yesterday. And to me, I was probably as excited or more excited than Alan. So, but that, to me, that's the power of space to really change people's lives, literally.
And have you been to space, Dylan?
No, I haven't, but I'm negotiating with my wife, Gabrielle, to do that, but she's not totally on board. Her point is wait till our daughters are through high school before I get on a rocket, which I think that's fair. But
Dylan,
yeah,
I had that same challenge to my husband, except it wasn't space, although he did want to be an astronaut when he was younger.
Yeah.
He wanted to climb Mount Everest when our
Right.
children were little.
Right.
And I said, wait until they're grown because they need a father.
Yeah. Same
Now
argument.
last night he was watching one of the Mount Everest movies and he gave me a face and said, now I'm too old to do it.
Well, I don't think he is. Just a quick story on that. One of our board members is an astronaut. We actually have 4, I mentioned earlier. But one of them, Scott Parazynski, is an astronaut, as I mentioned, but he also, and he's a medical doctor, and he's a Rhodes Scholar, and he's all these things, of course.
Low achiever.
Yeah, well, but then he decided he had to climb Everest because no one had been to space and climbed Everest. I'm like, Scott, can you please just stop achieving? Just please, you're making us all feel bad. So he's climbed Everest. I think he was in his 50s when he did that. So
okay.
Yeah. So, and I'm happy to put your husband and Scott in touch if they want to compare notes. So
thank you.
The stories that you're sharing, Dylan, make me excited for the next generation. And I think sharing in someone else's joy, it makes me excited for my 3-year-old of just like the possibilities here.
Yeah.
Because I think it's incredible. I want to move to manufacturing because I know you're a leading advocate of the sort of space manufacturing area. Before I do, Omar Sanad, if you're there, I hope I've pronounced your name right. You've got a question around manufacturing. Are you there, Omar?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi there.
Yeah, I guess it was for Dylan, and it's perfect that Kathleen's here as well, because it was really centered around, I just sort of always wondered, how we hear like the car industry in Detroit has like been, going down, and it's like, well, will space, I just kind of envision as we continue, and as you mentioned, it's going to be a $3 trillion industry in the next 10 years. Will that be, do you see that as like the new sort of car, like what we relate to the car industry today as, like, well, but instead of building rockets, and then will that be just in our country in the United States, or do you see that as like a worldwide sort of endeavor. So that's really my question.
Yeah, no, definitely global without question. And I honestly, I see it bigger than automotive. I know that might sound a little bold, but I see it as the next, internet, basically. I think it's that big. I think it's totally disruptive. I'll just give you a quick example, 30-second example. The data set that's being built by all these microsatellites, now that we built the elevator, we can get mass to orbit cheaply and reliably. We can now get constellations built cheaply and reliably, and you can also downsize the size of these satellites. That data set that we're generating, which are all different kinds of data. So it could be optical, like reading license plates like the classic, but it can be things like infrared, looking under clouds, high-speed internet, as we talked about, but all these ones and zeros, feeding that into advanced AI, machine learning, and predictive analytics, I think will totally change the world. I mean, if you had perfect real-time information about everything that's happening on Earth, I mean, it raises privacy issues for sure. But if you think about that data set, what is that worth? I mean, think about Google's data set as $1 trillion data set, and that's essentially known historical information that's really not predictive. Imagine a data set that's more robust, always on, persistent, and predictive. I think it's a total game changer. And that's just one segment of the industry. That's just the data generation piece. You have space-based energy, space-based manufacturing. I mean, we could go on and on and on. So I think it's bigger than automotive. I think it's going to be a new way of how how civilization operates.
And Dylan, do you see the US leading in the space of space manufacturing, as if you think about the globe, or do you think that's a space that the US can take?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are definitely other players. I mean, the UAE, small little teeny country, just did a Mars mission. JAXA, which is Japan, very capable. ESA, which is European Space Agency. China, I mean, I've said this before, they've blown my mind in terms of how far they've come in the last 4 or 5 years. They're extremely formidable. So I think it really, I mean, if you look at, and I try to explain this to people who aren't necessarily global business background within the space industry, I tell them, I said, all industries are global. Media, pick whatever industry you want. The exception really has been space. And the reason for that is the whole kind of nationalism by which space was created from, and national security issues and regulatory issues. But if you look at commercial space, there's really no force that can resist the globalization of commercial space, right? There's no government that can control that. It's like almost like blockchain technology. It's like, once the horse is out of the barn, it's just going to take care of itself. So I think it is very much going to be a global industry. It has already become that, but even more so in the future.
And Kathy, there's a question for you on how, and I want to build on this manufacturing piece, but Kathy, there's a question, how do you advise clients with unique investments such as space?
I mean, basically every client, in my mind, Dylan might disagree with me, but maybe he'll agree. There should be a core portfolio, a core portfolio that you have, and then you literally add on satellites in a sense, right? So, and no pun intended with that, but we'll add different areas onto a portfolio. And you can, alternative investments is an area that we look to for certain types of access to areas that are harder to access. And usually in the beginning stages, that's where you're taking on more risk, but you also have the opportunity to, have more return. We find a lot of clients want to invest alongside their values and their passions. So for somebody who is very excited for, sustainable investing, the environment, we have lots of different types of investing there. And there are some ETFs and so forth that you can access space concepts with, but they might also have companies that you consider, general run-of-the-mill companies mixed in there too. So you don't have quite the same level of access as you would through a private investment. And again, SPACs, all different things like that. We're always trying to think outside the box and find ways to access that for our clients. And again, matching the passion and their interest with their investing.
Great, thank you, Dylan. Any additions to that?
No, I think Kathy nailed that. I mean, I agree with that perspective. But I do like this notion of sort of having at least some part of your portfolio where you're really engaged, you really care. I get great joy out of it. That's why I like the early stage investing. I still do that because I like the mentorship. I like understanding what the business plans are. I like meeting the teams, you know, female-led, you know, back to that point, female-led founders, really backing them, making sure they have a leg up and that they're getting funded. And I just get great joy out of that. I really do.
So you do that personally, Dylan, your own personal?
I do. Yeah, I do. I just think it's really important, and I love it. I mean, you know, I wish I had more time to mentor more people and get more connected because I get great joy out of it. But unfortunately, it doesn't scale very well. It just, you know, it's hard to do more than a handful and be productive, and your day job and everything else you have in your life.
Right. Yeah.
I'm definitely going to follow up with you, Dylan, on understanding who the female founders are in this space.
Yeah.
So I'd be very interested in that.
Amazing. I mean, amazing. Yeah. No, I'd love to get you plugged. We could even do a panel on that. Amazing leaders, amazing people, as you would expect. I mean, that shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, there's a lot of amazing people. They just need an opportunity. That's it. You know, they'll take care of the rest. You just have to give them a shot.
What type of areas do you see, like in the founder space, in the founder area in space? Like what type of products or companies or, you know, ideas are they coming up with that you find interesting?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons right now. Right, launch is still very hot, so there's lots of launch companies. Ones I really like are about servicing satellites in orbit. So imagine a satellite that was autonomous, that had some intelligence, that could maneuver around and clean up. Like, for example, we have a space debris issue. You know, cleaning up space debris, deorbiting satellites that are dysfunctional. So that whole refueling satellites in orbit, kind of the whole commerce around orbital mechanics, I think is really hot. Space-based energy I like, space-based manufacturing I like. This whole notion of planetary resources. So, you know, you're on the moon, you're on Mars, what's available and how do you, you know, there are business plans now that blow your mind. I mean, synthetic biology, like taking resources and printing proteins or printing food, or, I mean, it's like, really? 3D printing like your breakfast?
And
crazy.
I think I've got this right. In 2017, you became the first private citizen to manufacture an item in space when the gravity meter you co-designed and commissioned was 3D printed on the International Space Station.
Right. That's true. Yep.
Can you talk a bit about that? And also, what are some of the biggest advancements you're seeing in space manufacturing?
Yeah, so there was a company, or is a company, and I was close to the founding team that had a 3D printer on the space station, and they were looking for, NASA was their client, they were looking for a commercial customer. And I said, well, look, I'm happy to be your first customer. And so we wanted something symbolic, and we were thinking of, you know, like a modern day sextant or something, like a high seas, you know, something to represent space travel. And believe it or not, this is a true story. You'll think I'm making it up, but when astronauts launch to space, the way they know they're at 0G or microgravity and to unstrap is they literally put like a stuffed animal or stuffed toy in the cockpit, and when it floats, they know they're at 0G. I mean, that's what they do. It's hilarious. So the idea with this gravity meter is it's a pyramid and there's a ball that floats inside, and the idea would be, it's symbolic, of course, but you would mount it, and when the ball floats, you would know you're at 0G. So that was the idea behind it. And, you know, to me, it was fascinating. We did this with the middle school, transmitting the print file, right? Explaining to them, okay, we're not going to send a rocket to the space station. We're going to hit send, and ones and zeros are going to be transmitted through the air. And then on the space station, this thing will be manufactured. And, you know, in an hour's time, the astronaut will be playing with this in space, and just seeing people's minds, just, you know, like 12-year-old middle school kids, just like, wow, right? So those kinds of things. And really the whole idea around the project was, how do you create, we call them dinner table conversations. How do you make sure that a 12-year-old girl sitting around the dinner table with their parents is saying, can you believe what just happened today? Or, I mean, there are a lot of people in the world that don't know we have a space station, right? They don't know that humans are like living in space right now. Lots of people don't know that. So having dialogue around that and getting people inspired about what's possible, that was the whole idea behind it. But, once you can manipulate mass, 3D printer, everything you do, you can do. Now, you have the issue of microgravity, which they had to solve, because essentially, I don't know how much you know about additive manufacturing, but it's essentially it's extrusion as opposed to pushing stuff out. So gravity is definitely in the mix. So you have to sort of design around that.
Right.
But once you sort of solve that problem, in theory, you can print anything, right? You just need the materials. And so don't get me started. We could go on and on and on.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I think that there's a lot to follow up on here. And we've shared your DylanTaylor.org. There was a lot of interesting initiatives you shared. Where can people find those? Is that your website? Are there other places?
Yeah, I think DylanTaylor.org is a good place to start. There's a lot of links there. People can also email me directly at dylan@dylantaylor.org, or reach out or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect them. But yeah, I mean, I would say if you have any interest in any of these initiatives, just drop me a note and I'll get you connected for sure. But yeah, I mean, space is for everybody. That's just the final point I would make, Juliet, is people say, well, what's changed with space? Well, I would say you don't have to be a STEM educated PhD, right? Space is to the point now where you can be an artist, you can be in media, you can be pick any industry you want. All of those skill sets are going to be needed for where space is going. So if you have a passion for it, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be passionate about space and passionate about whatever your core, skill set is or core profession, because you don't have to be a scientist to be tapped into the space industry now.
Brilliant. And Kathy, what excites you most about the future of the space world?
I am starting to think I might be able to apply to be the first financial advisor in space. We'll have to see.
I love it. Well, you got to put an application through to Space for Humanity. So
there you go.
we're still accepting applications.
This was very inspiring. Dylan, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed hearing everything you had to say. And like Juliet, I could listen for a lot longer. Your passion and your knowledge come through very clearly. So thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah, Dylan, thank you so much. It's a fascinating conversation, and I know there's a lot more that we can explore in this area. And a special thank you to you, Kathy, who is a private wealth advisor at Morgan Stanley, for being part of this series. It's great to have you both on. Most importantly, thanks to everyone that tuned in today and for your great questions. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do share any feedback with us at community@worth.com. We will be sharing a video for those who couldn't attend, and also creating some content around this topic. So look out for that. Join us again next week at Worth Live on Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, for the next instalment of our Re-Architecting Philanthropy series with venture philanthropy organisation New Profit, where we'll be focusing on the future of work. And then again on Thursday at 3 p.m. for the next normal series, where we'll be talking about how women can boost their financial confidence right now, with fashion blogger Cece Elisa and Kathleen Entwistle, Managing Director and Private Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley. So please register for this online at worth.com/events. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself and others, stay safe, stay well, and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again, Kathy and Dylan.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, Dylan. Awesome.